Hello, everybody. Welcome to our informational webinar on the Making the Shift Youth Homelessness Prevention Awards sponsored by Canada Life. Making the Shift is a youth homelessness social innovation lab that funds, conducts prototypes, and mobilizes cutting-edge research to prevent and end youth homelessness in Canada. You can visit our website at makingtheshiftinc.ca for more information. Follow us at the Homeless Hub or on our social media platforms. For these awards today, our hashtag is MtS Prevention Awards. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that since this meeting is being held online, a singular land acknowledgement does not capture the richness of our distribution across many locations in Canada and around the world. There are few places on earth that someone before us has not called home. As Making the Shift is hosted at York University in Toronto, we would like to share the land acknowledgement that is used at York University. And we invite all guests who are joining us today to consider their own position with regard to the land where they find themselves. Making the Shift acknowledges its presence on the territorial territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I'm going to introduce to you Melanie Redman, our Partnerships and Implementation Director at MtS, and Dr. Stephen Gates, our Scientific Director.
Thank you so much, Francesca, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have a number of people joining the webinar, which means interest in the program is high, so we couldn't be more pleased. So we're gonna just do a short presentation about the awards, and Francesca is gonna turn us over to those slides. And then we're going to have Dr. Stephen Gates join us to talk about the definition of prevention and why that's so important and front and center in the awards program. And so what are the MtS Youth Homelessness Prevention Awards? Well, first of all, who doesn't love an awards program? It's so important, especially with the youth homelessness sector, to celebrate the amazing work happening on the ground. And unfortunately, we have too few opportunities to do just that. So out the gates, we're just excited to be able to showcase some of the amazing work happening on the ground. I used to be with the EVA's Initiatives for Homeless Youth, and we had an awards program at the time, a national awards program, which is no longer around. And that program was so fantastic for a number of reasons, because it helped us unearth innovation in communities across Canada. It allowed us to shine a spotlight in the media, to government, to funders about that work and how important that work was. And it also allowed us to bring together all of those award winners into the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness, which Away Home now hosts. And it's a pan-Canadian community of practice. Now, we've since expanded beyond that original group of awards program winners, but it was really helpful in bringing together some of the most fantastic innovators from across the country. And so what are we trying to achieve with these awards? We're hoping to celebrate and showcase the work, unearth innovation, further disseminate the definition of prevention. One of the things I should also mention about the awards program with EVAs was that it was a fantastic program, but at the time, we didn't have a working definition of homelessness prevention. And so the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, Dr. Gates and team, Aaron Day and others, they flushed out a framework for how to think about homelessness prevention. And then after that, we collaborated to develop the roadmap for the prevention of youth homelessness. And it gives us practical examples, and Steve's going to talk a bit about that. But it also shows us who's responsible for what in the prevention spectrum. And so one of the other things we're hoping to do with the program is to determine where there might be opportunities for us to conduct additional research and evaluation, and perhaps even additional demonstration projects, such as we have with the Making the Shift demonstration projects. And then we're also asking questions in the proposal package to help map the barriers to developing prevention programs and interventions. So in your difficult work to get your program or your collaborative up and running, what got in the way? And how might we think about our role as advocates in helping to remove some of those barriers? Next slide. Eligibility. So the submissions need to meet the definition of prevention in the roadmap for the prevention of youth homelessness, and Steve's going to focus in on that. Evidence of positive impact on youth between the ages of 13 and 24. The definition of youth homelessness covers off that age group. Now you can serve other ages with your program. It's just, we also hope you'll need to be serving this age group as well. And the projects that stand out will include projects that take a rights-based approach, show some intentionality around addressing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls, that exemplify innovation and action. Collaboration is really important. Replicability, inclusivity of those with lived experience of youth homelessness is really important, and we'd love to see that. And those initiatives that show that there's potential for sustainability. Again, you know, your project doesn't have to check off all of these boxes, but these are some of the lenses that the adjudication panel will be taking in reviewing the submissions. Next slide. Award winners will be. So you'll be showcased in a public webinar hosted by us. And if you know the Homeless Hub, and it's a pretty massive dissemination arm of the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. And so your work will be featured prominently. You'll be invited to share your work in conference opportunities. And we couldn't name exactly what those are at this time because we're in a pandemic and we're not sure what those opportunities are going to be just yet, but they will be there, at least virtually. And then invited to join the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness if you're not already part of the learning community. And also, the observatory is going to work with us to create a mini case study of the initiative that will be very useful for you moving forward. And you'll be showcased in an updated edition of the roadmap for the prevention of youth homelessness. So it's really important that we continue to revisit the roadmap and integrate new information, new examples, et cetera, moving forward. And you'll be potentially eligible to receive professional evaluation and public policy support. And so we put this in there because we know that there are a number of projects and initiatives that could benefit from additional evaluation, or perhaps you're ready for some replication or scale or additional investment and you need some support around public policy. We have a strong public policy team. Many of the initiatives that will come forward are within organizations that may not have that capacity, may not have those professional staff, et cetera. So now I'd like to hand it over to Steve to talk a little more about the definition of prevention and why we're grounding the awards program in the definition.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to put up PowerPoint now. As Melanie mentioned, you know, we haven't really had a definition of homelessness prevention until recently. That's partly because in North America, the prevention of homelessness has generally never been a priority. Now it is. The government of Canada supports it, and many communities are now interested in prevention. And so that raises the question for them. I get prevention. I mean, in a pandemic, who doesn't understand the value of prevention? But what exactly does prevention mean in the world of homelessness? What does it look like? So we're going to go through this today. And part of the reason is that if, for those of you who are on the webinar, it'll help you to discern, like, does what you're doing, would it fit within the category of homelessness prevention as we are defining it? So here's the definition. I'm not going to read it out loud. I trust everyone can do that. But I think the key is to understand it in terms of two things. One is you're stopping people from becoming homeless in the first place or resolving their homelessness absolutely rapidly. The other is that you're helping people exit homelessness, but in a way that ensures that they don't become homeless again. So there needs to be thought to supports and that kind of thing. So this is the definition that we have come up with. And as part of the definition, we also came up with a typology that identifies different kinds of prevention and as well who is responsible for that kind of prevention. And we'll come to that later. But before we do, I just first want to talk about, like, when you have a definition of something, it helps you to understand what it is, but we also need to understand what homelessness prevention is not. Okay. Programs for youth who are currently housed that do not either specifically identify and target young people who are clearly at risk of homelessness, or do not provide youth and families with supports designed to prevent their homelessness in that case, are not considered prevention. Okay, so examples that are not prevention are lunch programs, sports or arts programs, community programs, targeting youth. And these programs may be working with young people who are at risk of many things. Could be dropping out of school, or getting involved in crime, that kind of thing. They could be at risk youth, if we can use that term. But that doesn't mean that any or all of them will become homeless one day, right? We can't generalize to large groups of young people the proposition that, we have a program, a sports program, and every single young person in the program is at risk of homelessness, because that's probably not the case. The other thing you need to think about in these kind of cases is that the question to ask yourself is, if my program or intervention did not exist, would that person become homeless, right? Is the intervention the thing that is stopping someone from becoming homeless? Okay, these are important programs, by the way. We're not putting down the work. It's very important work, but it's not prevention of homelessness. So homelessness prevention is also not about programs for youth who are currently homeless, but these programs that do not do the following things include help for young people to return to their previous housing, or help young people to exit homelessness with supports that dramatically reduce the risk of their return, right? So if you're running an emergency service and the person is homeless and continues to be homeless, then whatever your intervention is not prevention, because they are homeless, right? So things like life skills, cooking programs, employment and training programs, ID replacement, those are all super important things, right? And we should be doing that, but they aren't preventing the homelessness, as I say, because the person is homeless. So again, it has to focus clearly on young people who are strongly at risk of homelessness and intervene early to support them and their families, or helps young people exit homelessness, or works with people who have exited homelessness and ensures that they get the supports they need so that they thrive, their well-being improves, and their risk of homelessness declines. So we can go from there to point to things that maybe count more. And we'll go back to this typology here with the 5 different areas plus duty to assist. And I'll go through this and give you some clear examples here. So structural prevention means working upstream to address structural factors that produce homelessness. So poverty reduction is important, addressing inequity and discrimination, increasing the availability of affordable housing. All of these things are crucial and can contribute to the overall reduction in homelessness. None of these things are going to be the responsibility of the homelessness sector or people working with youth, right? Like, you can't really address these in a significant way. These are large-scale problems that require complex, large-scale solutions. A second area of prevention is systems prevention. Our public systems are implicated in the production of youth homelessness in many ways. Young people don't get the supports they need. There are barriers to accessing services that do exist. There's often not equity. But the other thing that implicates public systems in youth homelessness is many young people are involved in public systems, right? Like child protection, the criminal justice system, healthcare, and all of those institutions may contribute to homelessness by discharging people into homelessness. So we all know that young people can age out of child protection, and their risk of becoming homeless is quite profound, because about 20%, a study in Quebec found 20% of young people who were in child protection do wind up homeless at some point. Likewise, in corrections, if we know people have no home to go to and we discharge somebody from prison, the recidivism rate goes up, these kinds of things. So programs that work to support the transitions of young people from public systems in a way that provide them housing and the supports they need, those things are prevention, right? So if you're involved in that kind of programming, that matters. Early intervention is a third category. So this works with young people at the point where they're at risk of homelessness or have become or are couch surfing, and they need help right away. And so the basic approach is to use a system of care and intervene with the young person and potentially their families to either help them return home, or if that's not safe or possible, to help them move into some other kind of accommodation that's age appropriate. So here's a number of early intervention areas. So programs that specifically work with young people in crisis, where there's a potential that they're going to get kicked out or have to leave or run away. Some of these programs focus on enhancing family and natural supports. So building the natural supports around the young person, helping mitigate the problems that are happening in the home that are creating the risk, that kind of thing. That counts as prevention. School-based early intervention programs that target, that identify young people who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness, and then provide supports, not necessarily by school staff, but by community organizations working in partnership with the schools. Those kind of things are preventive. Shelter diversion projects that actually, when a young person shows up at the shelter, the focus is on giving the person alternatives to the shelter, including going home or finding somewhere else to stay, and wraparound supports to address the underlying issues, so that they don't become homeless and don't wind up in the shelter. That's prevention. Housing-led supports, so programs, say somebody winds up at a shelter, if you're able to rapidly get the person housed, and give them supports, that's prevention. And then finally, this is a connection to human trafficking, including sex trafficking, but also for work. Because those experiences so destabilize young people, if we do good work around addressing trafficking, we're reducing the likelihood that eventually those young people will become homeless. So that's prevention. So these are the examples, the kind of things. Evictions prevention is a big thing. In Canada, we have a list of everybody who has been, filed a notice of eviction. Doesn't capture all kinds of eviction, because eviction can also be informal. There are different things we can do and different approaches in communities. Some involve lawyers, some involve things like income supports or rent banks, that kind of thing. These are examples of homelessness prevention, because we're addressing the risk that people are going to lose their housing, and we provide them with supports. And then finally here, housing stabilization programs for youth who have exited programs. The most common one is, of course, Housing First for Youth, but there are other interventions that are housing-led, that also support young people. And again, the key is not just to get the person housed, chuck the keys through the front door mailbox and run away, but is to provide people with supports that stabilize their situation. And those supports can include enhancing family and natural supports, these kinds of things. But the focus is on, again, the well-being of the young person. So these are examples of what Housing First for Youth, or what preventive approaches are for housing young people. There are some interesting policy developments around supporting young people that would qualify as well. So if you wanted to find out more, download the roadmap. The link to it was put in the chat room, and we'll be moving to questions very soon. So thank you.
We'll now begin our 20 minutes of Q&A. So if there are any unanswered questions or items that you didn't get out of the presentation, please put it in the chat for us. And if we don't get to it today, we will follow up with you individually. So please give us your email addresses. So the first question I have here is, what is the rationale for the age range 13 to 24 for youth homelessness?
Okay, so we developed a definition of youth homelessness and wanted to give guidance around the ages that it can apply. Different organizations have different cutoffs. whatever you land on in terms of an age range is going to be to some degree arbitrary. We chose 15 to 24, the upper end, because many organizations have that as the upper end. But the 13-year-old piece is really important because we want to draw attention to the fact that there's a vulnerable group of young people who often aren't old enough to access homelessness services. In the Without a Home study, we found that 40% of all currently homeless youth had their first experience before the age of 16. And those youth had much more complex pasts than those whose first homelessness happened after 16. And so in Ontario, for instance, and many jurisdictions, there's no supports for those under 16, and child protection isn't always an option either. So we want to make sure that if we really want to have an impact, getting at those young people under the age of 16 is important. So we created that age range to just make sure that we don't wait until things are really, really bad and the young person's 16 and shows up at a shelter.
Thank you, Steve. Our next question is, can you please give us another example of the type of program that would fit into the collaboration category? Probably for you, Melanie.
Yeah, sure. And I think Steve gave a number of really important examples. I think when we're talking about youth homelessness, we always have to remember with prevention that the youth homelessness sector can't possibly do all of the heavy lifting of preventing youth homelessness, because there are other systems players that are responsible for, unfortunately, driving young people into homelessness, and so also get to be and hopefully want to be more and more part of creating the solutions. And so we have a number of examples. Any project where you have a number of organizations collaborating with the school, for example. And we see a lot of that in action with Youth Reconnect programs and the Upstream Project and other school-based initiatives. We really wanted to shine a spotlight on how important collaboration is in our work around youth homelessness prevention. Steve, do you have any other things you'd like to add?
I no, just to reiterate, like those kind of collaborations are really key in our thinking about addressing homelessness prevention. We think that the sector alone can't do it, right? That because there are these other institutions and players that can either contribute to somebody becoming homeless or can help resolve the problem, we need to see those kinds of collaborations. So collaborations with the healthcare system, with education, as you said, criminal justice, community organizations. There's a whole range of things where collaboration can happen. Or if you were to look at a community-wide approach to prevention, right? And, where there's a number of organizations that integrate their work and processes to ensure that preventive interventions are available for every young person who either is, at risk of homelessness or who has exited homelessness.
And we'd be more than happy to have a submission from a community-wide response that's showing that it's effective. And we'd love to award a whole community-wide response. So, if you're out there and you're part of that, please consider submitting.
Thank you. Our next question, has the Upstream Canada framework in the Geelong project been implemented in the Canadian context yet? If so, where and were the results similar to in the Geelong region of Australia?
Excellent question. We have two jurisdictions that are now implementing it, and we're conducting research on it. So one is Kelowna, British Columbia, and they've already started the work. So they've done the assessment with young people. And the other is the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, where they're trying to take it province-wide. And so in both cases, we've been working to ensure that there's fidelity to the model as much as possible, given the community context. And the results will be emerging, in the coming years. But it's very exciting. There's growing interest in it. And what we've continued to learn from Australia is just how effective it is. And that there are schools in almost every community in the country means that we could be doing a lot of preventive work with schools. And so it's a classic example of a partnership as well.
And Steve, we should give a shout out to 3 previous examples of upstream in action in Canada. The first was with 360 Kids in the York region. And since the time, they've moved away from doing the upstream project and are moving toward doing Youth Reconnect because of some challenges with full implementation of the model at this time, but they really want to get back to implementation of upstream. You also have the Niagara region, and where there's been implementation of the programmatic side and the survey side of the upstream project, but not the research to practice elements. And so it doesn't have the same kind of rigorous research to practice elements that they have in Australia. And then there was a third attempt in Ottawa. And so the conditions are still there in Ottawa to move forward with upstream if we're able to mobilize the partners and resources. But we think in all of those cases, we think we learned so much from that we're now applying to the Newfoundland, Labrador, and to the Kelowna spaces so that we can get to what we're calling exemplar examples of upstream in action. We also formed the Upstream International Consortium with Wales, the United States, and Australia, because in all of these jurisdictions, we're all trying to implement upstream to the fidelity of the model in Australia. And so we're sharing all of those learnings, our researchers are working together. So what we're hoping in the next few years is from all of these jurisdictions to have much more evidence of the effectiveness that we can then go back to all of these other places in Canada that really want to do upstream and say, see, look, we can do it here. So that's the goal.
And I think one final thing about that is the more communities we have it, the more we're able to have a community of practice in place where people can learn from other communities and troubleshoot problems based on talking with others who are doing the similar kind of work.
That's great. Thank you very much. Our next question, will applicants receive a review of their application and will they receive any advice on their future applications should the program go ahead?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. In thinking back to how what we did with the EVA's awards, we did provide feedback on request from organizations. Now, I think providing feedback to every submission, it's going to determine how many submissions come in. So, for example, if we get 150 submissions, it's going to be pretty difficult to provide any sort of helpful feedback. But I would say upon request, absolutely. Steve, I honestly hadn't thought of that. So thank you for raising that to our attention.
I think that's absolutely, like, we'll have feedback because we'll be making decisions on these things and we'll have conversations. We have as you saw, a fairly substantial review panel. So we most certainly would be able to advise people, this is what we found, these would be opportunities to strengthen it and these kinds of things.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Great. Next question. I run a program in the community with teenagers who are all at risk of many things, including homelessness. We provide workshops such as art classes, cooking, and employment training. Does that fall into the category of prevention?
Well, we would need to learn a bit more about the program, but generally that wouldn't, right? Because for it to fall in the category of prevention, you'd have to actually identify who amongst that group who's participating in your program is significantly at risk, and then have an intervention that addresses the underlying issues, right? And so probably the kind of activities that you're talking about, if they're more general life skills focused things, those are all really important. I would never say don't do that kind of thing, but it'd be hard to demonstrate through those life skills activities that that person's homelessness was aborted, right? That it was the key driver that helped a young person not become homeless.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. And another question here. We support approximately 200 families, about 600 individuals experiencing homelessness in our shelter program. We also have recently started supporting families in our prevention and diversion program. About 25% of these families include a youth aged 13 to 24, which would mean about 150 youth individuals in 50 families each year. Is there a minimum percentage of our clients that need to be those youth aged 13 to 24?
I don't think so. I mean,
No.
Melanie?
No, and we'd love to hear from you about your intervention, because that's really important, that the work with the family, the whole family. And so, yeah, please, I don't think that there's a reason why we need to put a minimum on the amount of young people.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie and Stephen. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. We will be sending the recording to everyone who was registered, and we'll share it on our social media pages. The deadline to submit your application is June 30th at 5 p.m. The information and application portal can be found in the link in the chat. If you'd like to learn more about Making the Shift, you can visit makingtheshiftinc.ca or subscribe to our newsletter, and the link should be in the chat for that as well. And then if you have any more questions for us leading up to the deadline, you can email us at makingtheshift@yorku.ca. And we'll say one final goodbye. Thank you very much, Melanie and Stephen.
Thank you, Francesca.
Everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for making the time.